Hello and welcome to the most important words. This is a place where I want to talk about stories that matter to me. My name's Clark, and I have been reading Brandon Sanderson books for about a year and a half now. And I've had many conversations with my good buddy David, who got me into that. And I wanted to actually start recording them, and hopefully, with that, it'd be kind of fun to have a little bit of a podcast. So my story starts about a year and a half ago when my buddy convinced me to read Brandon Sanderson. And I had always looked at him as sort of like a YA author, um, kind of like Twilight or Harry Potter. No shade to either of those. I have read all Twilight and all Harry Potter multiple times, and I love them. It just wasn't something that I was interested in at the time, just like in my life. But he convinced me that it actually kind of wasn't that, and Sanderson actually has some sick stories. And so I decided to go to Barnes and Noble, and I fully intended on buying Mistborn because I thought that was sort of like the flagship. And I found a copy of the first book for $30, and I looked down, and there was a Way of Kings that was way bigger and was only $16. And so I bought the Way of Kings. And I just felt like it was a little bit better of a deal, I guess. And within, the first two chapters, I guess, I was pretty much hooked, and I have kind of not stopped reading since. Currently, I have finished all of Stormlight. I have finished Warbreaker. I have finished Era 1 of Mistborn. And that is it. I have been reading quite slowly, and I did kind of want to talk about my philosophy of reading. So my buddy David and I, who will be having these conversations together most of the time, at least that's the goal. David has read basically everything multiple times. And so he's sort of like a seasoned pro, I guess. He goes to Dragonsteel, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, it's the like the Brandon Sanderson convention. There's probably a better way to say that, but that's kind of what it is. He goes every single year. He's met Brandon many times. He's got tons of like signed stuff, which I guess probably a lot of people do. But anyway, he's like a diehard fan. He's read everything multiple times. When I say read, he's actually only listens to audiobooks. He's a super busy guy. And he reads stuff super fast. Like, for example, when Wind and Truth, the final Stormlight book, or I guess the most recent Stormlight book, came out, he read it in like 2 days, or I guess listened to it. He just cranks it on times two and just zooms through because he knows that he's going to get like spoiled. I am kind of the opposite. I will read very slowly, and I try to come up with theories. I try to be thoughtful. If I am reading a book and I come to a piece of information that tells me some theory or whatever, I have no problems stopping all progress until I go find every reference that I possibly can to try to figure out what this thing is. I love trying to come up with the theories of like what is going on as I'm reading it. And so that's kind of the idea of this channel. These podcasts, I really wanted to talk about stories that like matter. And one thing that really I've come to know over the last like year and a half is this is something I've been missing in my life. Just like stories that affect me, that make me feel big feelings. And, I don't know. I feel like they actually do kind of affect my life quite a bit. I'm constantly thinking about these things, and I know there's many other books that are amazing, and obviously those aren't even excluded from the most important words. And for the time being, we plan on basically talking about Sanderson stuff, but there's no limit, right? It's just these books, they really resonate with me. And we kind of wanted to, have a podcast where we talk about that stuff. This is why this matters to me. This is why this has like affected my life. And that is the thing that I've been missing over the last couple of years of my life, is just thinking deeply, if that makes sense. I kind of go on autopilot. I'm just a busy guy. I've got a wife and a kid. I've got a job. And it's really easy to not like sit down and reflect. It's super easy to not have time for that. But audiobooks are amazing, which I use as well, but I also do read. Um, but it has been a year and a half where I've been able to like really just sit down and reflect. And that's been pretty important for me. And it's helped a lot to be able to share these things with my buddies, where we have a constant text feed where I'm reacting to things, come up with theories, we have conversations. And so we just kind of want to formalize that, mainly for us, and also if anybody else is interested in seeing something like that. And so the kind of content to expect, we're basically thinking about two different types, like two pillars, I guess. The first one is like sort of reading along, reacting to stories or videos or podcasts or whatever. So, for example, we'll take a book that I have not yet read, or that we both haven't read if a new book comes out. And every so often, we'll just sit down and have a podcast about what's happening, the themes, the story beats we like. And most fun for me is like the theories, like what's going on? How does this magic work? What's this character going to do? Who really is that character? That kind of stuff. So that's sort of like in the weeds reacting as we're consuming, or, consuming is probably the wrong word, but consuming a book or a story. It's probably the better word. And then the second one is a deep dive. So this is things like, we take a topic that is, one thing that Sanderson's really good about is, a lot of his books are interconnected. And it's really fun to piece together these like deep dive conversations of like a theory. Oftentimes these will be things that aren't super explicit in the book. So we will be kind of taking some, what's even the word? Creative royalties. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but, so that'll be the second pillar. So the first one is like sort of reacting in the moment. This is what we're doing, or like this is, as we're reading. And the second one is sort of like these deep dive lore videos these conversations that we want to try to have. So spoiler expectations is super important for us. We will always be clear about spoilers in episode descriptions, and we will never assume that people are fully caught up. And so, for example, with the currently reading along episodes, we'll probably have a section where we talk about the book itself, and then, like the chapters we're reading, so we're caught up. And obviously we'll say this story, or, this episode covers through chapter whatever of this book. And then we'll probably sort of have another disclaimer. Okay, now we're opening it up to conversations about the Cosmere, which I probably will have, and we will have every time we do one of these currently reacting videos. However, that'll be a place for people to sign off if they haven't caught up with the then listed stuff of the Cosmere. And we will try to have exactly what is a spoiler in that section listed, but it might also just be like hey, if you're sticking around, this is like all Cosmere stuff. But there will obviously be a disclaimer, so that stuff isn't spoiled. In addition, I know that a lot of people. So one thing that Brandon does really well is he is really good about. How do I say this? Like, I have yet to find a loophole in the logic of his stories. I'm sure they're probably there, but I know that he's like really careful about that. Like, stuff is planned out, which is so refreshing, by the way, that it's not just like this random smorgasbord spaghetti of stuff thrown together. Like, obviously things change as he goes along, but it's just so nice that it seems like a lot of it is planned beforehand. And so because of that, there's all these forums, there's this thing called like Words of Brandon where like you ask him these questions at conventions or panels, and these things kind of become part of the canon, I guess, of the overall stories. Now I'm really bad about that. In fact, there have only been a couple of times that I've Googled something, and I think every single time I've Googled something, even if I thought it was super innocent, I have pretty much been spoiled. And so I basically never ever do that anymore. Like I just don't Google like basically anything. My buddy David basically knows everything, and he doesn't mind Googling stuff because he's read everything. So even if he gets a technical spoiler, it's like it's just because maybe he didn't think about the theory, if that makes sense. But like he knows what's going on. He knows all the stories. He knows all the characters. And so usually he is really good about like he's a master of not spoiling things but answering my questions. And so hopefully you'll see that in the podcasts. I am really bad about that. My brother, I've gotten him into Stormlight, and dude, I spoil stuff constantly. Not like I don't even. In fact, it's funny because I not only don't do it on accident, I actively try not to, and it still happens. So, sorry, bro. So I'm hoping that'll be an interesting dynamic. Someone who is. Oh, sorry. One more thing about that. I generally take the what's the word? The stance of like death of the author, which I don't mean any harm on Brandon whatsoever. That is not what that means. It simply means that if it's not within the confines of the covers, right? So from page one to page end, it's not something that I necessarily care about. Now that is different with Brandon. With other authors, I actually stick to that. Like if an author says something and it like changes something within the book, I'm like, well, wasn't in the book. I don't care. Sanderson's a little bit different, just because it is so planned and so good. And so it's not that I don't care about them. I just don't actively seek for these things, if that makes sense. And so a lot of my analyses and a lot of my conversations and my understanding is going to be within the text of the book. And every time I have an argument, every time I try to have a point or a conversation or, I try to use, like, I don't try to use my own words. Like I try to use the words within the book, if that makes sense. And David's kind of different. Like he has so much understanding of these nuances and these philosophies that Sanderson has. And by the way, not even Sanderson. He's just like I don't know. He's a smart guy. Like he reads a lot of books. He gets super entertained by all these things. And he's just a real joy to talk to about stories in general. Like it's just fun to have conversations with him. And so hopefully that dynamic will be interesting where I'm sort of like a, zealot. Is it in the book? If so, it doesn't matter. Not really. But, and then he comes from a place of just like this general knowledge. And yeah, it's a joy to have conversations with him about these things. This channel is for people like if you like, reading slowly, sitting with ideas, if you just kind of like fantasy in general, if you want another podcast about the Cosmere, that's kind of what we're here for. Yeah. We don't exactly know where it's going to go, but we're excited to explore it. We just appreciate you guys being here. If this is something that you guys are interested in, follow along and we're happy to have you. So this is the most important words, and we're thankful for the opportunity to talk to each other and everybody about stories that are important to our lives.